Good morning. Thank you for taking the time to join us for Vandis's webinar with our partner Gluware. At today's webinar, Ernest Leffner, Chief Product Officer at Gluware, Fabrizio Grimaldi, Senior Solutions Architect at Gluware, and Ryan Young, Vandis's Chief Technology Officer, will explore the operational challenges facing modern network teams and share practical insights into how organizations are adopting automation to modernize network management. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A window and we will either address them as we go or at the end of the session. We also have a few polling questions today and we hope that you will take part in them. A quick reminder to visit our website, vandis.com/events, for other upcoming events that you might be interested in. For those of you who are new to Vandis, Vandis specializes in optimizing and securing hybrid network infrastructures to achieve maximum value for our clients. With our proven process anchored by our deep industry knowledge, we deliver solutions and successful outcomes which cultivate strong connections and trust with our customers. For over 40 years, Vandis has delivered comprehensive strategies for secure IT infrastructures. We have partnered with Gluware to offer our customers solutions to help them simplify operations and manage complex multi-vendor environments with greater control and confidence. By attending this webinar, participants will walk away with a clear understanding of the core capabilities of Gluware's modern automation platform, including automated discovery and inventory, configuration drift detection, secure OS management, no-code workflow automation, and visual topology mapping for rapid troubleshooting, just to name a few. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Ernest.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Hello, all. My name is Ernest Leffner. I'm the Chief Product Officer with Gluware. I'm excited to be here today, and thank you all for joining. A little bit about myself. I come from 25 years in working in banking and financial services, having run networks at places like Fidelity Investments, Bank of America. I did some time running infrastructure as well as time at a big five firm. And you may be familiar with an organization called ONUG, the Open Networking User Group, where Nick Lippis and I founded in 2012, really focused on how users can take better control and have more meet and greet and understanding with fellow users so that you can help shortcut the adoptions of complex technologies. As Joanne said, today I'm joined with Ryan Young and Fabrizio Grimaldi, and we're going to jump right into this, the network automation tipping point. Really, we're focusing on the tipping point because what we find, in my experience, is that network automation is a little bit different than automation for just about every other type of IT industry. And the big reason for that is because every single vendor does it just a little bit differently, and they all have CLI interfaces and API interfaces. And then when you combine that with the fact that every device, about 30% of that device's configuration is bespoke, you have a recipe for automation going into the toilet and really being a large problem. And when you start adding in some of these complex components like scale, it becomes even more of a problem, right? When you're working at a large scale bank or even bigger, and you've got devices that rank in the tens of thousands, and you're not dealing with 2 or 3 different device types, you're dealing with 15 or 20 types of device types, it becomes very complex. Then if you're in a regulated industry or an industry that has a tremendous amount of security requirements, which I think just about every industry does these days, just being able to manage that compliance and understanding what the auditors need is a huge challenge. Then you've got the human error factor, depending on which advisor you're talking to, that can be anywhere from 60 to 80% of the outages in your environment. And really the only fix to being able to automate and bring down the cost of human error is to get humans out of the loop. And that's not to reduce human value, but it's to take that knowledge that they have, instantiate that in a network in a way where you can drive out configuration and validation without having to give up your entire weekend to do that. And then do-it-yourself automation being hard to scale. Do-it-yourself is a big part of our industry, and you can't really make progress or learn about how network automation is going to work in your environment unless you've gone through some of those growing pains. And so any automation platform that you need needs to be able to tie in with the work that you've done and help you get to the next level with both all your do-it-yourself capabilities as well as the other types of automation you want to bring to bear as a part of a platform. The bottom line here is let's get people out of the process. Let's get you your time back with your families, and let's keep the business running in a way that meets their needs and keeps outages to a minimum. Ryan, any thoughts with that from some of the customers you've seen there?
Ernest, I'd say the other side of this that we see a lot with customers is it requires a huge amount of staff to do
Mm.
the manual process. And for well done DIY automation, what we often see is there's a key man risk issue where the whole company is kind of beholden to, one or two employees who know how everything works together, and maybe say they decide to leave the organization or something happens that they're out for an extended period of time. Those DIY automations often start to break down because people start to shortcut past them to continue to do work in the absence of the SME that built that DIY platform.
Yeah, those are really good points. Funny story. I don't know if you remember the OpenStack days where people started, large scale adoption of OpenStack, and finding people who could do OpenStack was super hard. So your companies would hire total teams away from other companies, and then next thing you know, you've got an OpenStack platform deploying servers, and you've got no one that can run it, and it's a real danger. All right, some of the challenges really, and this is kind of focused on, if you don't have a platform of automation that takes care of some of these enterprise requirements across the board, being able to do things like handle multi-vendor, multi-domain, then you've got to create a lot of this from scratch. And some of these I've already mentioned. I won't go through them again, but ultimately these are the kinds of problems you need to solve on your own. And when we spend time learning how to start building network automation from scratch, like we've all done, right from the very beginning, you learn these lessons over time, and it becomes really, really, really complex, right? I mentioned that every CLI vendor, every API, every vendor has a different component. The next big trend that we're seeing come to bear is everybody has a controller, and those controllers all operate differently. So now instead of having just two or an API or a CLI, now you've got a software package that you've got to run and maintain and learn 5 different versions of. And then with people touching the network, it really slowly moves away from that known best practice and best standard. I was working with one of our customers to deploy a NAC project, and they decided, hey, the automation is not quite ready yet, but we're going to get started early. And so they rolled out about 5% of the estate when they got started. And then when the automation went and looked at it, all of those 5% of the estates that the people touched were all configured differently. And they had to go back through and repave that all with the automation anyway. And these things happen not because people aren't skilled. It's just there's so many things that are changing in the environment. So many things are proprietary or different as you're configuring those devices. It's very easy to make minor mistakes that can end up being something that causes a catastrophic outage. Another big piece of this is change management. I am required by law, I think, in contract to say I love change management. ITSM is my best friend, and I couldn't live without it. But as an engineer, I know how frustrating that can be. And so part of this is you've got to automate that change management too. Smiling and dialing to get someone to approve a change on a Friday night is like it's hell on earth. And so the goal is let's just automate that process, get it out of the way, and then hold the business units accountable for what they need to do. And then lifecycle management. I know many people on this phone call have a spreadsheet on their C drive right now that lists all the device types, the versions of code they've got on there, CVEs, vulnerabilities, end of life, end of support dates. And ultimately, that's how they're managing the network. And there's no shame in that. That's the way it is. But the goal is let's get a source of truth up and running. Let's leave a legacy that you can hand off to the next person, and something that other people like your audit and compliance teams can pull data from in order to make it real. And then finally, security patching and OS management. With everything happening with Glasswing and being able to find new vulnerabilities with Claude, this is becoming more and more of a focus. In the last 2 weeks alone, we have been inundated with not just existing customers saying, "Hey, we're good," right? But new customers are saying, "Hey, I kind of tried to do this piecemeal, and now I'm in a really bad situation." Ryan, have you been hearing from your customers around the same kinds of problems?
Yeah, especially with the rise of people using vibe coding, we're seeing more and more issues coming to the market. And then you look at like Claude and Mythos, you have 40 of the largest technology companies in the world all of a sudden having access to a platform that's essentially real time hacking them and saying like, hey, you have vulnerabilities here, you have vulnerabilities there. Right? We're starting to get to a point with AI where patching is going to need to be a sprint and not a quarterly. We'll get to that cycle.
Yeah. It's funny you talked about vibe coding. Yeah, I see a lot of these demos where people are like, "Oh, I'm going to vibe code the network." Nothing sends chills down my spine faster than when people are like, "I'm going to vibe code network configurations. I'm going to vibe code the business critical EVPN VXLAN deployment." And so there needs to be a level of robustness and protection that you need to bring to bear. That's, I think, a little bit more, I don't want to say professional is not the right word, but a little bit more safe and predictable. Let's say that.
So I know we're on a timer, but you did jump over one that is a big pain point for some of my customers, especially customers where maybe the initial config is done by, Terraform or Ansible, but then the state doesn't really change afterwards. And that's configuration drift, right?
Yeah.
Especially with large customers that have, multi-regional networking teams or security teams that are jumping in and making changes. We see a lot of drift where, like, one of our customers is actually building a nightly config backup tool to determine who's drifting, like who's causing the drift on their infrastructure. So, drift undermining compliance is a big deal, both from the change control aspect, but if you have especially in like these where, in some ways, our global networks and our customers have become more simplified over the years with, SD-WAN coming into a strong place and MPLS sliding away. But at the same time, like the goal to be at golden templates across the infrastructure on switching and routing, it starts with the best intentions, but it quickly moves away as people do, quick fixes or quick changes to get an end user happy. And it's one of the it's like a silent gangrene within IT infrastructure.
Yeah, and anybody who's ever been on a call with a regulator knows what that pain can feel like, right? It's all right. We're going to hit a poll here. What's your primary objective from network automation? If you take a second, just take a look at that and hit that. Just give us a little bit of an idea on how you're evolving from your network automation journey. I think it's always about cost myself. All right. Well, that poll is running. We start thinking about the kinds of attributes and capabilities that you need in a network that supports a modern network today. Ultimately, there's a couple different components that really rise to the top. And the first one I'll talk about is safe and predictable by design. Gluware in particular is something called Dial, the device interaction and automation layer. And where the value is in that is that Gluware, the platform, is able to talk to all of the devices independently. You don't have to build those drivers. You're really focused on the intent and whether or not an operating system that you're trying to roll out has a file checksum error, or you don't have enough memory in the device, or you've got other issues that are popping up. Ultimately, our goal here is to make sure that the device layer and that automation protects you, and you're just focused on saying, hey, I just need to check X, Y, and Z, and then I need to make sure that that code hits this number of devices, and then the workflow automations that you've pre-built work for you. And here you can see we got a good mix on the response to the poll. And it looks like reducing manual effort and operational costs is number one, followed closely by network reliability and uptime. And this makes a ton of sense. Intent-based automation, you'll hear this word passed around a lot. And really what we mean by that is you've spent all of this time configuring these devices. You've got golden config templates out there. You've spent a tremendous amount trying to standardize. And the goal is let's find a way to take all of that work, instantiate it in your network automation system so that you can deploy based on that intent and simplify, and really reduce the amount of time that you have to create these configurations from scratch. And it's got to be fast. You've got to be able to realize your investments in the same, fiscal year that you spend the money. I mean, it's ultimately really, really important. You need, like we were just talking about config drift. You don't need to write a tool to get there. Automatically, you should automatically know, hey, Someone touched this device, right? We all know the SNMP traps that pop out as a result of that. Let's take an action. Someone touched it. Now we've diffed it. And the result of that diff is a ticket's been opened in ServiceNow, or an email's been sent, or a Jira opened, whatever the right answer is. And now you know, hey, this user ID, this TACAX ID made a change. Here is what changed. And then you can either remediate that immediately, or you can set that to be remediated later in time. The goal being to put you in control of understanding when that happens. The open extensible architecture, like I was talking earlier, we know everyone's at a different point in their journey. We need to be able to connect with Ansibles. We need to be able to connect with Python. We need to be able to connect with Terraform, like Ryan was saying. Ultimately, from an open, extensible architecture, we have, for example, an Ansible collection where the APIs are defined in Ansible modules that are leverageable via AAP. So if you want to go with an Ansible first automation process, right, like a center of excellence, and you want to run your playbooks, but you want to be able to use the source of truth within Gluware. You want to be able to audit and compliance. Being able to do configuration drift can be difficult at large scale with Ansible. Just run all of that through Gluware, then the results published directly back to Ansible, and you can use playbooks to remediate. You can call on config models or call workflows themselves. Every single workflow within Gluware is an API header on it that you can call from any system to activate and run. Ultimately, this has got to save money. There's got to be value for our businesses. We're not out here to spend money profitably. Our goal really is to have an ROI, bring that to you so you understand what you're getting day one, and there are no surprises. And then finally, future looking. We have self-operating and self-healing capabilities today. Our goal is to bring those to you in an easy to consume mechanism. I have an event management activity that kicks off. Like we were talking about, I see that someone's written to a device, then a workflow fires off that goes and grabs that information, does a config drift, notifies it or remediates it, and now you're really talking about a loop that fixes a problem before you've even known it's a problem. And then finally, AI is a big part of everything we do, and everyone's at various stages of maturity around AI. The goal here is to make sure that the products and services that you build from an automation perspective can interact with that enterprise AI layer so that you get one seamless working together infrastructure AI layer. Ryan, what do you think? I know I missed something here.
I think you're pretty good. I'm actually excited about the next slides you have coming up.
That's the one I'm excited about too. All right. What we have right here is just a high-level product. We'll call it a marketecture for the joy of it. And really, Gluware comes in a couple of different, we'll call it application components. And these application components are built into two product segments: Discover and Audit, and then Policy and Remediation. The goal here with Discover and Audit is to give you the power to take a look at your network from a read-only perspective, derive the inventory, understand the lifecycle management attributes. You talk to your Cisco APIs to pull in your lifecycle management components, end of life, end of support dates, CVEs, etc., and put you in control of being able to dashboard those and understand what's happening across your network. The config drift and audit platform is also considered part of that, and that really puts you in the power of understanding everything from CIS benchmarks to NIST standards to your own golden configs and templates. And then you need the dashboard and the data explorer components of that together. One, to visually represent, and two, because just about every single data element within Gluware is exportable via the API. So if your audit and compliance team wants a feed every single day to determine whether or not you were in compliance, you can do that. And instead of doing quarterly or semi-annually or even yearly events, that entire process is not about if you were in compliance, but when you weren't and exactly what you did about getting back into compliance. And then topology is just really about helping your operations teams and those same auditors and other engineers understand what the network is built like and how it's constructed, and give you a visualization of that component. And then in the policy remediation component, we are really focused on operating system upgrades, a graphical config management and config model editor so that you can manage your configurations at scale. It's about bringing the network process or robotic process automation to bear so you can use a low-code, no-code drag and drop system to orchestrate complex workflows. There's an API that backpins all of that capability. We've got something we call service connectors that we build to activities like ServiceNow and other northbound interfaces so that you can interact with those enterprise level services that are critical. We have intelligent model discovery, which is really all about how do we simplify building those configuration models? How do I take a look at a gold standard or a configuration and then auto render those features for you so that you can just drag and drop them in your config models? And then we've got Lab IDE for those folks that really want to get into development and understand JSON. That will give you the power to write applications on top of Gluware as if you were a Gluware developer working here with us. One of our customers, they wrote a conference management system with Gluware where it checks the calendar to determine if there are meetings coming up. It looks at those meeting rooms. It brings all the infrastructure up and tests it in time for those meetings. And then when the meetings are over, it brings them all down again to secure those meeting rooms. So there's really no limit to how deep you can take the complexity with Gluware or the activities that you want to do. Our goal is to be with you every step of the way. And we bookend this with Gluware Titan. We are currently in our beta phase. We'll be going GA very, very soon with Gluware Titan. That comes with an intelligent MCP server. Actually, I think we'll talk a little bit more of that in a second. An AI agent and copilot to help you with your work. And then finally, I mentioned Gluware Dial before, but we have an engine that underpins everything within Gluware that understands how to have a bidirectional conversation, either CLI or API, with those end devices. We support 55 plus device operating system families today, and for bringing new devices on, new operating system families, it is a quick endeavor to get them up and running. Ultimately, the goal there is to take the complexity of talking to those devices out of your hands, so that you're focused on the things that matter, the business intent and the outcomes you need to work. With Gluware, we've got it all kind of handled from top to bottom. You can see from the applications, config drift and audit, source of truth, right? Being able to handle not just proprietary technology, but open source like Sonic or cloud native components, multi-vendor. We've got device rollback. We've got the capability to do upgrades on the fly. We've got compliance and audit components to be able to drive out all of your compliance needs. And many of our customers start there. Let's just get a hold of the source of truth. Let's get inventory up and running. Let's get our audit and compliance to golden standards to where they need to be to get themselves in a place where they can do safe and predictable change. And then OS management's a big, big part of that as well.
So Ernest, we talked a little bit in a previous slide about how, patching is going to be, a sprint process moving forward. We have customers who, it's taking them, 90 days to 120 days to fully patch their
Yeah.
infrastructure today across multiple platforms. I know it's super low hanging fruit for you guys. Can you talk a little bit about the patching process? Like how can you guys speed that process up?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, there's a few different ways. First, the network robotics process automation, that workflow engine, basically gives you the capability to build a workflow out that has all the attributes you need to execute a change. It helps you understand what the code is, right? And the OS module, the OS manager module itself has a whole bunch of pre-checks and post-checks built into it to do things like making sure there's enough disk space, making sure the file checksum's not corrupted, right? Making sure that you preload the operating system first. So you build a workflow that says, hey, let's instantiate all of our code out on a Wednesday at 3 o'clock, because all we're doing is pushing essentially FTP, SCP, et cetera, to move code out. Then we have the process by which you choose the devices and then activate that upgrade. It brings the devices online, it reboots them, it checks them for health to make sure that they're working. If you have customized network state assessments you need to do to say validate BGP peers, or looking at interfaces, or resetting interfaces for PoE devices, for badge readers and things like that, you build that logic into the workflow. And so you're not worried about visiting every single device and logging in. Really what you're doing is you're sitting back, you're firing off a workflow that instantiates all those devices, waits for a change to get approved. And then once that happens at the time specified in that portion of the workflow, it starts rolling through and rebooting and activating all of those operating systems. And we've had a couple of customers, one in particular called us up one day and they said, hey, we have a big audit coming. We have 3,500 devices that need to be upgraded in the next 30 days. And if we don't get that done, we're going to have huge audit problems. So we gave them an example workflow that gave them about 80% of what they wanted. They built that into the pre-checks and post-checks that they need for their business logic. And then they just started rolling change. Boom, boom, boom. They were doing 500 at a clip. And ultimately, they were done way early in the process. And it was a new management team that came there. And while they were super happy with what Gluware was doing, they didn't put all their eggs in that basket. They also took their in-house Ansible team and they had their Ansible team duplicate the Gluware process inside of Ansible. And what they found was that Gluware was finished with those upgrades before the Ansible team finished the pre-checks, not even the deploy of the code to deploy it or check when it's done, just the pre-checks to make sure the network's in the right state to go. And so when you talk about speed to value, that mix of being able to call Gluware via API to roll out that OS upgrade, even if it's got a whole Ansible backend, we can help expedite that within the operating model that makes sense to you.
Awesome.
All right, I think we have another poll coming up here in just a little bit. All right, Gluware Titan. We say the industry's first AI-powered intent-based network automation platform. And what we mean by that is we are taking a very different approach than everyone else. Initially, we want to do the Starship Enterprise, and we wanted to kind of let you talk to your network and drive. But what we really thought about as we got that off the ground was there wasn't a lot of value in that. Really, the value is in helping adoption and bending the branch lower to make adoption even faster. So there's an interface within Gluware that we call it our Gluware Copilot. It talks directly to our internal MCP server, and that MCP server has a bunch of agents set up to talk to your customer's LLM or ours if that's something that's important to you, and interact with that dial layer. And what that means was when you want to build audits or you want to build network state assessments or you want to write code with the IDE, all of that can be generated with the AI engine. And that engine that we talk about, that dial layer, has been expanded into a validation engine in the MCP server so that when you're asking for a network state assessment, you're not just getting back a bunch of code, you're getting a validated engine rules-based component that has been tested to work when it comes in. So the variation that you need to make for a working network state assessment or an audit is absolutely minimal. And then very much like we try to be that API and CLI layer across the entire network, we also want to engage with key services around AI. And we have a demo on our YouTube channel that you can take a look at where we connect with Netbox and ServiceNow, and through the Gluware interface, the Copilot, you say, hey, I'm having a problem on this circuit. What's the circuit ID? And then Netbox pulls back that circuit ID. And then we say, okay, ServiceNow, open a Sev3 ticket. Let's go ahead and use this circuit ID with these attributes. And boom, it opens up your ticket for you. And if you're e-bonded, that goes right to the carrier. And all of that happens through one interface within Gluware. You don't have to swivel chair. You don't even have to open ServiceNow. And that's really what we're looking to do, is be that layer within your enterprise AI component to be able to bridge the network with the rest of the world. All right, take a look. Where are you in your tools journey? It'd be great to hear about what best describes your current network automation and where you are from a maturity curve perspective. And then I've got a couple of, maybe I'll just do one use case and then we'll hand it off to Fabrizio. Here, we've got a customer testimonial. This is a huge hospital system in Ohio State. Ultimately, CG had a vision for how to drive automation across the entire stack. The hospital system's in a position now where uptime and criticality is absolutely key. Lives are literally at stake. And they were looking to open a new hospital wing. The mission was a 26-story state-of-the-art hospital, and their goal was to configure the entire hospital end-to-end with an EVPN VXLAN fabric between the different floors, as well as the services back at the data center, and they did not want a human involved at all. So we worked very closely with them, built a completely ZTP process, leveraging a whole bunch of technology, both on their site and within Gluware. And we were able to stand up stacks of 6 9500s, 34,000 plus Catalyst switchboards, completely without human intervention. We kicked off the pre-staging of the automation and the configuration, building the configurations of the devices, actually printed out a wiring diagram for the smart hands to bring with them so they knew exactly what ports to plug where and how. And then when it was ready, they turned switches on in the correct order and the whole stack came online. We also did other components like Splunk alerts. This is the event management I mentioned earlier. This is all about being able to take alerts around things like config drift and audit and auto remediate, and then ultimately tie that back into their operations system so they were always in control of what's happening inside that tower. And then finally, you can see what the automation was. There were 9300s and 9500s in these stacks. Another big component was they needed to be able to do OS upgrades across the entire hospital during wing maintenance and outage windows. We were able to set up workflows so that they were able to stripe the upgrades in whatever mechanism they want. Just feed them a list, select the devices however they wished, and they were able to do rolling upgrades. And this was key. So Cisco came out with an operating system upgrade just before they went live that they wanted in the hospital, and within hours that all those devices were completely upgraded and ready to go. So I think with that, we have another. Oh, this is a good poll. Let's see. Partial deployment. Yeah, we see a lot of people. This is generally where everyone is, where they've automated key activities. They've got some custom tools they've linked together. Now they're looking for a way to kind of bring that whole vision together into one manageable chunk. So this plays along with what we see in the industry. This is Social Security Administration really started focusing on audit and compliance, and now we're in remediation and operating system upgrades. It really started out from a security and audit perspective and then really moved directly into remediation, and they are a fantastic customer. All right, let's drop down. Yeah, go ahead.
Just before you jump off, I do have one question because we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but when it comes to like the Terraforms, the Ansibles, is it a replacement, an integration? Like how does that work for customers who have invested a ton in other infrastructure as code platforms? How does the integration really work in terms of, say, tomorrow they pick up Gluware? What are they getting in terms of value when connected to their existing investments?
That's an awesome question. I wish I had paid you for that one. That's a good one. Uh, Ultimately, here's what I'll say. We are complementary with those technologies. We have a very deep partnership with Red Hat. What we find is that enterprises have an automation operating model, and that operating model is usually with Ansible or with Terraform at a very top end level. And where we fit together is Ansible can handle about 80% of the network tasks that you need to do. But when you start getting into complex things like audit and compliance at scale, or operating system upgrades, or NAC configuration and compliance, or EVPN VXLAN deployment, you need an on-ramp where the network engineers can instantiate their knowledge and codify it so that your operating systems, your Terraform or your Ansible, can call it via API. And so what we do is we meet in the middle. What we find is that folks and organizations that have Ansible get really far into the process, and when it gets to the hard stuff, it really starts to bog down. So what Gluware does is it provides that on-ramp to help you get to the next level. So you'll build your audits in Gluware, you'll build your operating system flows and like your advanced config models, because Ansible is very, very good at doing things like, writing configurations and instantiating templates and things like that. So what happens is we have a set of, for Ansible, 13 Ansible modules that directly give you access to the API so that you can run named audits, get results. You can run config models if you wish. You can activate workflows. And the goal here is to work hand in hand with an Ansible so that we simplify the ability to get the results from large scale audits. And then Ansible can take all the action in the world that it needs to, whether that's to call Gluware, run your own playbooks, run a backup, however you need to see fit, whatever you see fit. And it keeps it within the confines of that Ansible operating model. So everyone who's in the center of excellence is familiar with it. They're calling Gluware where they need to for the complex items, and they're staying exactly where they need to be. And the same with Terraform. We have a provider that lets you kick off any workflow you want within Gluware simply and easily. The end result of that is if you want to provision a port in a data center, but you don't want to write all that complex logic with Terraform, you just build a small workflow. Terraform calls it with the information that's needed. We write that configuration, and then we tell Terraform it's done. And then Terraform goes on with all the rest of its automation. We become a piece of the puzzle and how you drive that out.
Okay, cool.
And from a value perspective, what we find is that you get a more seamless experience. The complexity on some of these like core changes or large scale routing changes, right? Being able to do that out of window lowers the amount of impact, because it turns out that for many customers, those complex changes were still all manual. And now you move to one orchestration method, one approval method for how that automation turns out. And for our demo today, I'm going to hand it over to Fabrizio. We're going to do something a little simple, but it's going to tie together in a big way. We're going to show you device discovery and inventory, and then we're going to build a workflow that's going to detect configuration drift around around a configuration. We're going to dynamically automate that remediation through a workflow, and then we're going to check it to make sure it's back in compliance when we're done. And the one reminder I will give everyone, or I'll share with everyone, is that we're doing an NTP configuration here, but it doesn't matter if that's routing configurations. It doesn't matter if it's quality of service. We can do this with any configuration inside your device. So with that, I'm going to hand the ball to Fabrizio. Thank you, sir. You're on mute.
Yes, sir. Caught that. Thank you. All right, let me share my desktop and let me present for you. Okay, great. So, well, every network team knows the pattern: endless visibility gaps, manual work, constant pressure to just keep the lights on. And what Gluware brings to the table is a way to break that cycle, to go from manual control to automated confidence without replacing your network or having to rewrite your playbooks. Now, Gluware is a suite of application components that we can see here in our left-hand navigation menu. And each of these applications or application components works together to give you complete control of your network's lifecycle, your network device's lifecycle. Everything from onboarding and insight to compliance, upgrades, and the full automation of the device. Each of these applications builds upon the last application. So in Device Manager, what we do is the Device Manager actually brings our devices and our data together in one place. It's where we manage our devices and can view a summary or a subset of the data that is discovered and known about a device. Data Explorer, dashboards, and topology, as well as the Gluware API, work together to provide you with actionable intelligence. So this is the engine that you can query and ask things like, show me the number of switch ports available on a given device. Show me which devices at site X contain or do not have iOS version 17.13.8 or whatever version you might want. And so these applications give you that actionable intelligence and a reporting capability. Config Drift and Audit is one of the most powerful applications in the App Suite, as it keeps configurations stable and compliant. What's one of the things that we often ask ourselves as engineers when we get a support ticket or something, or the network breaks or something, is we generally ask ourselves, well, what changed? Something changed in the network because yesterday it was working fine and today it's not. So Config Drift and Audit tells you immediately. It finds that needle in a haystack across all your devices, whether it's 100 devices or whether it's 10,000 devices. You'll be able to find the configuration drift that occurred in your environment. An OS Manager safely automates the hardest, riskiest task in networking, which is the upgrades. And so Ernest alluded to how we work with OS Manager, in that OS Manager has some built-in safety checks that it executes when it runs an OS upgrade job. But using network robotic process automation, which I'll show you in just a second, you can extend those capabilities and do your own state assessment. That is to say, run your own show commands and validate the data before you proceed or after you have done an OS upgrade. Config Model Editor lets us define our intent at scale. This is where we define the configuration that a device should have, our intent, our good configuration state. And finally, Network Robotic Process Automation, or Network RPA, or NRPA for if you really want to shorten it, is our workflow engine. And our workflow engine is extremely powerful because this here is this is a network robotic process automation. And what we have here is a workflow that I will be demonstrating today. I call it my iOS self-healing network. The objective of this workflow is to take a device and take a snapshot of this device. And when it takes a snapshot, it's then going to assess whether the device is drifted from its well-known state, from its known good state. And if it has, it's going to then audit the device to see if that drift is something we care about. Because on some devices may be noisy with drift. Descriptions change, certain interfaces may change that we may not care too much about, but certainly there are different components or configuration elements in a device that we do care. For example, an ACL that was removed from an ACL stack. These are the things that we care about. So an audit of the device will reveal that information. And so the one thing before I show you the workflow, the one thing that I want to point out is that every one of these workflows is an API endpoint. And Gluware end users can define custom input parameters that you can provide when you run this payload or this workflow. So in other words, what you can do with this is you can integrate this with your network monitoring platform. I use Splunk as an example, and a syslog message gets generated from the device that gets interpreted by Splunk that then runs a given workflow. So this self-healing workflow, this demo, this auto remediation is something that can be triggered by a syslog message. It doesn't have to be run manually. We're going to run it manually today, and let me go into the workflow. We'll edit the workflow to show you how we build workflows in Gluware and RPA. So this is our work pane. This entire window here is the work pane, and there's a timeline that gets created with a start and an end object. We can see down here when you first create a workflow. Now, this timeline is blank, and the objective is to take or select Gluware applications or Gluware actions that are organized by Gluware application component. So for example, in here we have device manager. So these are the tasks that you can automate within device manager, config drift and audit, as well as the config model editor and OS manager tasks, as well as custom third-party tasks. And even if you find that there is a task that you need that you don't have just because it's doing something really unique, like connecting to an external API, Gluware Lab IDE allows you to develop tasks that you can use within your workflows. So the way you use these tasks is by selecting a task and simply dragging it into the timeline in the desired order that you want the task to run. We can move tasks around in the timeline to easily edit workflows as we build them. And so what this workflow is going to do is it's going to execute this interactive task. This interactive task, well, the workflow is going to filter out all devices that are not iOS. It's going to give me a list of iOS devices when I run the workflow. The select target task allows me to cherry pick the devices from this list of devices that are filtered out, or in, if you want to consider it that way. So this is an interactive task. If I were building a workflow that I want to run in an automated fashion, in other words, in response to a syslog message or any other SNMP trap on my monitoring station, then I would exclude this task and maybe provide the device name as an input parameter so that I can target that device specifically. But for now, we'll leave this task in there and I'll show you how this works. The first thing that we're going to do after selecting the device is to capture the configuration of the device. Just think of it as taking a snapshot of the device. We're all familiar with taking snapshots of VMs, similar process. We connect to the device, we do a show running config, and we capture the existing configuration. And this is visible in Device Manager as well. So after we have captured the configuration, we can add if-then conditional or conditionals. And so here I've added a conditional that asks if the captured status equals changed. So what we're asking is, hey, you took a snapshot. Has this snapshot changed from the well-known or good configuration or default configuration that the Gluware end user has defined? And if this drift has occurred, then we can run an audit policy. If the drift has not occurred, we can just simply send an email that says, hey, the device is not drifted, it's compliant, and we can end the workflow. Now, I'll show you, after we run the workflow, I'll show you the audit policy and how we build audit policies within Gluware. But here in NRPA, it's just as easy as selecting an existing audit policy. After we have run the audit on the device against the last known good snapshot, we can then see if the audit status has failed. This is really, really useful because, again, if the audit status has not failed or is passed its audit, then we can simply send an email notification that says, hey, the device drifted, but it has passed an audit. And the audit in this particular case is auditing the NTP configuration of the device. Now, as Ernest said earlier, the demo shows NTP just simply because this is when I do demonstrations, this is the hello world equivalent of Gluware. Right? You want to write a configuration model or a audit policy, and selecting something like NTP is your hello world example. But It's really powerful because within an audit and within the configuration model, you can define what features you want to look at. So you can extend it beyond a simple feature like NTP. You can audit and remediate SNMP, syslog, DNS, router profiles, BGP, OSPF, for example. Any configuration element of a device can be auto-remediated. And so if we have drifted, the next step is to associate an assembly. And associate an assembly on a node in the provisioning engine is equivalent to adding say, for example, you wanted to write a script to update NTP. Well, you would write an empty script, that's the assembly, and then you would put the NTP data model within that. So it's a container for features that I want to provision. That's what an assembly is in Gluware. And after we have associated the assembly, which contains the NTP feature that we want to provision, we provision the device. We then take another snapshot post-provisioning, and we set that to the default snapshot. In other words, the last well-known good configuration. And then finally, we notify ourselves with a send email task. One of the things that we can do, in addition to all of this, as Ernest alluded to with our Titan AI, is generate a state assessment, which I've already done with our AI application here. State assessment is, okay, so what we've done here in this workflow is taken a snapshot and we have provisioned it if the snapshot is different, if the config is different than what we intend it to be. But state assessment goes a step further. State assessment allows us to specify what show commands we want to run to validate whether the device is compliant or not. In other words, okay, you've got the configuration, but is the clock in sync is what we're asking with state assessment. So this is a different level. This is a custom show command that we run, or not a custom show command, a show command that you can run on the device, so show NTP status, and then monitor the output to see if the clock is synchronized or not. So these are some examples of the things that we can do within Gluware. Now, I'm going to show you the device that I'm going to work on, and I've already broken the device. So let me just take 2 seconds here to connect to it, and we'll do that. And so what Gluware is going to do is it's going to evaluate the NTP configuration of the device. Oops. There we go. We need the sec. There we go. All right. And this is our current NTP configuration. Now, we are missing one NTP server, .11. Here we have .10. We are missing one NTP server. So this device will fail the audit after we take a snapshot because it does not have that third NTP server. So let's see the Gluware workflow in action. We've changed it, so we're going to save it. We validate the workflow. This step here makes sure that all your variables and all your tasks are properly configured, and then we'll run the workflow. The workflow can be pre-filtered. So in this particular case, we're filtering in only iOS devices. And so we can change this workflow to do different things and to filter in different devices, and we'll execute the workflow and then proceed to the activity menu. Now, when we're in the activity, you'll have a running workflow, but it is blocked. That's that select targets task that I mentioned earlier that allows me to cherry pick my devices. This is particularly useful if you are doing things like updating an array of devices and you want to only update certain devices in a say, for example, a VPC cluster or a multi-chassis ether channel cluster. You want to maybe cherry pick the left-hand devices before you update the right-hand devices, validate their health and all that good stuff. So this task is particularly useful when you're operating in that fashion. So in this case, we're going to select the router that we have targeted, and we're going to hit save. And now the workflow will begin executing. And we can view the results of each individual task in the log. And this is the real time the workflow is running on the device. So as you can see here, we're doing a capture configuration. We're taking a snapshot, and in about 30 seconds, maybe less, fewer, we're going to see the device get audited and the audit policy fail, and then proceed to provisioning. And so that's what it's done. We captured a snapshot, we ran the audit failed, and now we are provisioning the device. And in about, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 seconds here, we'll have a device that is now compliant with our stated policy. Now, while we're waiting for this to provision, let me take you to the elements, the audit policy, and the elements that I configured in this workflow that are making this magic happen. So for that, we'll go to Config Drift and Audit, and we will go to the audit policies, and I will demonstrate the audit policy that we used in this device. So one of the things that we can do is create an audit policy and specify one or more rules that we should look for in this audit. So we can add rules as I can do here. For example, specify a new rule. We can go back. Let's discard the changes and let's delete this rule. But we can add more than one rule, and a rule can be thought of as a feature. So for example, here I am auditing NTP. Another rule can audit my SNMP configuration, my ACL configuration, whatever you want to audit. And so in this particular case, I'm using a simple literal. Auditing allows us to use regular expressions, which is really powerful because it lets us do sophisticated pattern matching and searches and ranges of devices and device IP addresses. But for this, we are using a simple literal, and this can be as easy as going to a device with an existing configuration that you know is good, and then copying that config and pasting it into this rule. It's that easy to build an audit. And as you can see here, we're
Fabrizio,
missing this
we've
NTP
got a
server.
question. Why don't we
Great.
let
Please.
Ryan jump in with the question?
Please.
Yeah, so the question is in regards to updates. Is it a manual process to kick off patching and updates on a switch, or when a new update is released, is it automatically applied? Is there a choice? Can it be scheduled? And if an update fails, or if it doesn't pass its checks, is there an automation for the rollback if there are issues?
Yes, we can automate all those processes, so we can easily just as easily upgrade, downgrade a device. The selection of an image is not automatic. It is something that is user defined, but the way we do updates is to create an OS plan. And in the OS plan, you would define what image you want and then proceed with the upgrade after that.
Okay.
Okay. All right, great. So we've audited the device. It failed the audit because it was missing this line. Okay, great. That's the audit component. The configuration component, or how we provision the device, is shown in Config Model Editor. So one of the big differences between Gluware and other network automation platform is Gluware's use of data modeling. And what that means to those of us in English, let's go to this other device here. And what that means to us in English is that what we're doing essentially is we have built data structures, essentially JSON, that can contain the unstructured output of a show command. So if I, for example, run a show command, like let's see if this device is here. So now this device should be correct. So if I run the show run sec NTP, you'll notice that we have our new NTP server. So one of the things that we can do is assess the state of the device as well by checking whether the clock is a configured state. But the objective of Gluware is to read show commands and capture this unstructured output and put it into a data model, essentially JSON. So what that allows us to do is really anything that we want programmatically. With a scripting language, we can manipulate this JSON file, we can evaluate it, we can validate it, we can do a host of things. So in this example, if I wanted to see if my device, the clock was synchronized, I could do a show NTP status, and we can see that the clock is synchronized. But what I want to do is capture this text into a data model so that I can use a scripting language like Liquid.js to validate this information, to check to see if the device is in fact synchronized. So config modeling, whereas Gluware is doing read-only operations here, as in that it runs a show command, captures and converts the unstructured text into a structured data model. With config modeling, we're doing the opposite. We are defining a data model that we want to provision on the device. So it's the reverse. The reverse is happening here. We're essentially putting a config on the device from parameters that are stored as JSON. And so this is what the CLI does. If we click on the CLI component here, let's edit the CLI component, and I'll zoom in for you because this is kind of small. We use a templating language, Liquid.js, to dynamically generate a CLI from devices that are stored in a network feature instance, which is this red box here. And if we look at this red box and look at the time properties, we have stored the two NTP servers that I want to provision. Now, this is particularly powerful because if I wanted to add a third NTP server, all I need to do is add it to this form. Just add the IP address to this form, and a third NTP server would be rendered dynamically by the CLI component that I just showed you. This is really, really useful. Imagine when you are adding a BGP neighbor to a router's BGP configuration, and that neighbor entry has 6, 7, 8 lines of configurations that you must deploy. Well, you don't need to go into the CLI to add a neighbor. You can simply add the neighbor here in the form instance, and Gluware will dynamically render the CLI for that device.
So, Fabricio, we only have 4 minutes, so I want to open it up to Q&A. And while we wait for any questions to come in, I have a question of my own.
Yes, sir.
It's so you've talked a lot about pushing config, and automating everything. Let's take a step back and talk about, complex stuff that my team does or our customers do in their
Okay.
environment today. So say customer has all Cisco and they're using EIGRP, and now they're moving to, a mix of Juniper or Aruba or Arista or Fortinet, and they need to move to a more open standard like BGP or OSPF. Can those changes be pushed from here, and kind of move the customer network forward, or is that something where like you could black yourself out? You have to make the changes and then re-pull the state after the changes are made. Does that make sense?
Yes, you can do them completely from within Gluware. This feature, when you build these features out in Gluware, or you download them from our example page on GitHub, the features can actually support a variety of different operating systems. So in this particular example, this feature supports NXOS, iOS, JuneOS, and Arista EOS. And so one of the things that we've helped some of our customers do is to transition from a Cisco environment into an Arista environment, interestingly enough. And so we can do that with the same feature because that same feature supports a provisioning model on both devices.
Okay.
And,
Um,
and Ryan, just a quick add there, right? And this is why the process of engineering is still so important, right? Why the people portion of this is so important. When you're constructing a big change like that, you would migrate all of your routing configurations, but you wouldn't do any redistribution. You wouldn't actually affect the EIGRP network until you've gone in and validated that all your BGP peers are up and running and you're ready to go. Then you can use Gluware to roll out the access list to be able to turn on like the route redistribution, et cetera, and just activate the network in a safe and predictable way.
okay, awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we are out of time, and I know that Joanne, you have a drawing that you want to do. So, uh, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for doing this today. It's an awesome platform. We're really excited about our partnership with you. We've seen a huge demand from our customers to iterate quickly, as well as protect their environment. And Glueware is really the solution that we've found that does all that. So I really appreciate your time today, as well as everyone on the call. And with that, I'm going to hand it to